Okay, so I'll begin. So I will present a study that I did together with a colleague of mine, Kristina Wallertz at SLU. And the title of my speech is Phasing Out Insecticides, Effective Ways to Protect Seedlings Against Pine Weevil Damage. And in Sweden and in northern part of Europe, we have a huge problem in our regenerations. It's the pine weevil, Hylobius abetis, that is the largest cause of seedling mortality in Swedish conifer plantations. And you can see the bug here. And what it does is that it feeds on the bark of the stem of the seedlings, usually close to the root collar. And this can cause girdling of the seedling and therefore they might die. And if we don't do anything, up to 80% of the planted seedlings may die during the first 3 years after planting. So what is the solution to the problem? Well, before insecticides have been used to protect the seedlings, but nowadays, due to restrictions and environmental concerns and work-related concerns, they have been phased out and replaced by new type of protections. And usually a type of coating is used, and you can see several of them on the picture here, that the lower parts of the stem is covered with some sort of coating. It's like a glue or wax or something. But the development of those coatings have been very fast, and they have not been tested on a larger scale. So that's why we set up an experiment with the following research questions. So how effective are the coatings in comparison with insecticides? How effective are the coatings in practical plantations, i.e. on a larger scale? And are the seedlings negatively affected by the coatings? Since we are covering parts of the stem and parts of the needles, could this affect them in a negative way, like affecting gas exchange, for example? And how important is the planting spot? It has been shown that planting in pure mineral soil reduces pine weevil damage, but does this still hold when we're not using the insecticides? And is there an increased risk of other insect damage than Hylobius, since the insecticides also reduce other damage from other insects? So to study this, we laid out an experiment of 16 clear cuts distributed all over southern Sweden. And the design was so that on a clear cut, we established a field experiment where we tested 4 different coatings with insecticides and controls. And this field experiment was established on a larger clear cut where seedlings were also practically planted, and those seedlings were also protected with some sort of coating. And we invented this practical plantation with 20 circular sample plots as a comparison. So what about the results? Well, if we look at the seedling mortality caused by pine weevils 2 years after planting, you can see here in this graph the 4 different coatings that we tested, that the seedling mortality was down to between 2 and 7%. And compared with the insecticide, which was also around 7%. And you can see that some of the coatings were even better than insecticides. And compared to the control, where we have 28% seedling mortality caused by pine weevils. And in those practical plantations, we could see that the mortality caused by pine weevils was an average 5%, so similar to this controlled field experiment. To answer the question about if the coatings causes any stress to the seedlings, we set up a greenhouse experiment where we tested different drought stress treatments. But here is an example of the results from this study, and we could see no effect on seedling height nor on root growth. And in this picture, you can see that these are the coatings, and you have insecticide and control, and they have all similar height growth. And what about the planting spot then? Well, these are some results from the practical plantations where the distribution of the different planting spots that we classified was quite equal. And we looked at seedlings planted without site preparation in humus, in a mix of humus and mineral soil, and planted in pure mineral soil. And these numbers show the overall mortality, including pineweevil damage, drought, other insect damage, etc. And as you can see, you have, with increasing amount of mineral soil, you have a decrease in mortality. And what is worth to note here is that we had an extreme drought in Sweden in 2018 when most of these sites were planted. So the numbers regarding the mortality are pretty high in comparison with a more normal year, but a clear effect of planting in mineral soil. So other insects then. Well, Hylobius, that is the pine weevil, but what we could see is that their behavior changed with the coatings when they were applied. They climbed higher up in the seedlings and feeded on the top of the seedling instead of the bottom. And of course, this doesn't cause mortality in the same way as if they feed on the root collar, but it reduces growth and stresses the seedlings. We also found Hylastes. That's another bug that causes damage to this zone between the root and the shoot, where we don't have any protection, and it can eat all of the roots and girdle the seedlings as well. We also found some local outbreaks of this Strophosoma, which feeds on the needle of the seedlings, and doesn't cause seedling mortality, but affects growth and vitality, of course. So the answers, as a summary, the coatings were as effective as insecticides in protecting the seedlings against pine weevil mortality. There were no differences in efficiency in practical plantations versus the controlled field experiments. So they seem to work even on a larger scale and when planted in practice. There were no signs of increased mortality or damage related to stress, neither in the greenhouse experiment, or we couldn't see any signs of this in field. Planting spots with pure mineral soil increases survival. It decreases pine weevil damage, but also increases the possibility for a seedling to stand drought. Local outbreaks of Strophosoma and Hylastes were found, so there might be an increase in other damage than Hylobius when insecticides are not used, but more research is needed here. And this is probably one of the largest challenges in the future with a changing climate in our spruce plantations. That new insects and other behavior of the insects that we have. Okay, so that was my fast presentation. So thank you for listening, and I would like to thank Skogssällskapet, SLU, Skogforsk, and Södra who made this study possible.
Excellent, thank you, Karin. So we do have time for a question here, and there's one in the chat box. So the question is about the combined effect of exposed mineral soil and the coating. So are they additive or multiplicative? So in other words, if the coating is used, does the site prep treatment remain as important?
Yes, the more we say that planting in mineral soil, that it protects the seedlings from pine weevil damage. And if we add some sort of protection, this coating, you get this additive positive effect. So the more measures you can take against pine weevil damage, the better the results. So another way is to use also larger seedling type than a smaller seedling type. So the more you can protect the seedlings, the better.
Yeah, excellent. I was kind of wondering just about the coatings themselves, but how are they applied?
Yes, they are usually applied in the nursery. They have some of those coatings are quite well developed, and they are applied like in the lines before packing the seedlings. Yeah. So by robots or machines sometimes. So, but that also causes quite a lot of stress to the seedlings because they need to go through dryers and they're exposed to quite a lot of stress during the application. But it's very interesting to see those quite advanced lines in the nursery.
Yeah, it looked interesting, and the seedlings coming out all white like that too. It was kind of
yeah.
looked quite different, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Okay, so I think we are going to move on to our next presenter now. Oddvar Skray, if you are.
Yes, I am ready.
Excellent. And can you share your screen?
So, what do you want me to do then?
If you can share your screen on the bottom so we can see your presentation, that would be great. There we go. Just starting up here.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, you're not sharing the good window.
Yeah, can you bring up the presentation window here?
I have sent you my presentation earlier. I sent it to Helen Janet earlier. So I expect you to.
I can share my screen. I can share your presentation now. Maybe you just need to stop sharing so I can show up your presentation. So they should be a okay. I'll try to find yours, which seems to be here. So
yes, there it is.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Nelson.
I will run it from my own computer. Is that okay?
No, that's me. I will be, just tell me when to switch slides and I will do it for you.
Yeah, that is the title of my presentation. And the next slide, please. The background for this study is that fast-growing Norway spruce and West American Sitka and hemlock were introduced around 1950 to raise new forest in West Norway after a long time grazing and logging of the natural pine forest. Next slide, please. Because of poor seed regeneration of Norway spruce, new forests were raised by plantations. But these plantations may also represent a threat against biodiversity because of rapid regeneration of Sitka and hemlock from seeds in coastal areas and of Norway spruce from inland areas. Next slide, please. This table is showing the afforestation in West Norway after 1900, showing that the afforestation area increased up to 1970, and after that decreased somewhat due to changed agricultural policy, but the Norway spruce was the dominating tree species. Next slide, please. To estimate the rate of regeneration by seeds from plantations of Norway spruce in relation to other introduced species, Sitka spruce and hemlock in central West Norway was the first objectives. And then to see how soil properties, disturbance, and climate influence on spruce regeneration relative to the regeneration of competing tree species like birch and rowan. Next slide, please. The next objective was to relate spruce regeneration to age of trees and time since disturbance, to compare the vegetation composition on the ground at sites with high and low regeneration rates, and to work out the implications and preliminary recommendations in terms of future silviculture practice. Next slide, please. Selection. A large number of Norway spruce plantations and a smaller number of plantations of Sitka, hemlock, and larch were selected for the study, and the number of seedlings at 5 square meter plots at 10-meter intervals from the edge of the plantation into surrounding vegetation were estimated. In addition, site variables of monotrees were estimated. Next slide, please. In addition, the number of height of seedlings at 5 square meter plots, degree of disturbance, and coverage of main ground layer species of vascular plants and mosses were estimated. Next slide, please. This map is showing the location of the 30 Norway spruce sites. The inland sites are marked by circles and the coastal sites are marked by triangles. Next slide, please. This is the table of the coastal Norway spruce sites, showing low seedling density, but with a very high site dependency. The next slide, please. Strong site dependency was also found at the inland sites with much higher seedling density, as you can see from this table. Next slide, please. This is showing spruce regeneration along a 5-year-old clear-cut power line at Dalside with 18.3 trees per 100 square meter. Next slide, please. This is showing a spruce regeneration after the 3-year-old clear-cut at Kvanvik with very high spruce regeneration. Next slide, please. This is the map of the Sitka spruce locations, all at the coast of West Norway. Next slide, please. This is a table of the Sitka spruce regeneration with a very high seedling density and strongly site dependency. But the Sitka spruce is resistant against grazing because the animals will prefer other species instead of Sitka spruce. Next slide, please. This is the map of the larch site. They are only 8 locations investigated. Next slide, please. The larch is sensitive to grazing, but it has a moderate seedling density. Next slide, please. This is the map of the 7 hemlock sites along the coast of West Norway. Next slide, please. The table of seedling density shows very high values and very strong grazing impact, as you can see from the value of pastures here. Next slide, please. This is the Sitka regeneration from a 50-year-old plantation into a pasture at Vestbustad at the coast of West Norway, with low grazing impact on the Sitka spruce, but with high grazing impact on the surrounding ground vegetation. You can see that the Sitka spruce is really taking advantage of the grazing. Next slide, please. The same can also be seen in this picture, where the Sitka is spreading into a coastal heath in northern part of West Norway. Next slide, please. The hemlock is a very shade-tolerant plant with very high regeneration potential, and the seedling density was very high, about 394 plants per 100 square meter in this case. Next slide, please. This is the summary of the density, seedling density in all the sample plots of the Norway spruce and Sitka spruce at the coast and inland locations. And as you can see, the seedling density was highest at the Sitka spruce coastal sites, but it was also very high in the Norway spruce sites in the inland areas, and not so high in coastal Norway spruce sites. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just the seedling density in 0 to 4-year-old clear cuts with no ground vegetation. Next slide, please. This is the seedling density in 4 to 8-year-old clear cuts, showing a moderate grazing impact on birch and rowan. Next slide, please. This is the seedling density at the heathland sites, showing a strong grazing impact on birch and rowan, which will favor the spruce regeneration. Next slide, please. And even more at the pastures. You see at the high age classes of spruce, the birch and rowan is almost disappeared because of very strong grazing, and the spruce will take advantage of that. Next slide, please. This is the spruce regeneration and seedling density as a function of distance from the stand age, with maximum seedling density 23 meters from the edge. The reason for this is the shading effect. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just ground vegetation on spruce plots and zero plots, showing that the ground vegetation can be a good indicator of regeneration. Then you can skip the 2 next slides, please. And the next slide, and the conclusion. Yes, now we are jumping to the conclusion. First, the spruce regeneration increased with increasing degree of disturbance. Then, second, spruce regeneration was higher on inland plots than in coastal areas, indicating better seed quality and winter condition. 3, in contrast to Norway spruce, the regeneration of Sitka spruce from plantation in coastal areas was 2 to 4 times higher, and the age of seed producing mother trees was lower. Highest regeneration was found around hemlock plantations, while the regeneration of larch was of the same order as Norway spruce. Next slide, please. Comparison between clear cuts and windrows of different age show that seedling densities decreased by 50% or more the first 5 to 6 years after disturbance. Sheep grazing on coastal pastures seem to favor the regeneration of spruce relative to birch and rowan, in contrast to coastal heathlands without grazing. And mean spruce seedlings density reached a maximum about 23 meters from the edge of the plantations. Next slide, please. Pioneer plants pioneer plants were more common on spruce plots than at zero plots, while plants with a thick regrowth and a deep root system were most common at zero plots. This shows that the ground vegetation can be used as a good indicator of regeneration. And finally, the results indicate that in order to maintain biodiversity in Western Norway, all existing plantations of hemlock should be removed, and further plantations of Sitka spruce in coastal heathlands should be avoided. In areas where Sitka regeneration from plantations is strong as a result of favorable soil conditions, removal of these plantations and seedlings originating from them should be considered. In deciduous forests of inner West Norway, further plantation of Norway spruce should be avoided, but in the coastal areas it may be accepted because of low risk of natural spreading. Thank you very much for the attention.
Okay, thank you very much. So that we're right basically out of time. So if you have any questions for Oddvar, I'll just ask you to follow up with them afterwards, okay? So we'll move on to our next presentation now. So thank you very much for your talk. Our next presentation is from Mastara Daran Era.
Can you see my screen and also hear me?
Yeah, looks great. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, thank you for having me here. And my name is Mustarinara, and I'm doing my PhD at Swedish University of Agricultural Science. And next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about pre-commercial thinning in spruce plantation, and also use pre-commercial thinning as a tool to kind of trade off between timber and forest production. And this is part of my PhD, and I did collaboration with a couple of researchers from SLU and also researchers from Swedish Forest Research Institute that you can see all the names here. So it's a little bit of background why we are interested to do this research. So spruce is highly dominated in Sweden, especially in southern Sweden, and they are mostly planted. And in this planted spruce, natural regeneration of birch is very abundant. They are usually removed during pre-commercial thinning because Swedish forest management is very much production and economy oriented. But in recent years, due to climate change and also biodiversity conservation and forest certification, there is a growing interest among forest owners to keep this birch in this Norway spruce, to have a mixed forest. As I mentioned earlier, that Swedish forest is very much production oriented, so this mixture is well studied in terms of growth and yield. But birch is also a medium ranked food for ungulates, and birch also complement to the growth of Norway spruce in early age. So there is a potential of this mixture to provide forage for ungulates and also to produce high timber. So with that as a background story, we set 3 research questions in our study. First one is to see that if we use different pre-commercial thinning strategies, can that trade off between production of spruce and also forage for ungulates with the birch. And also we looked on the effect of pre-commercial thinning on the browsing compared to no pre-commercial thinning stand. So here, if I mention PCT, that means pre-commercial thinning. And also we know that ungulates are very selective to choose their food. And we know that they select between a stand, also they select food within a stand and even within the same tree. And from the earlier research, we also know that they even choose between the two species of birch, silver birch and downy birch, although their food quality is quite similar. So with that, we set the question 3, that is there any difference in preference of ungulates between seed birch and stump sprout? So birch means that naturally regenerated. And if I say stump sprout, that's mean when you cut the birch during pre-commercial thinning, the shoots are popping up. That's called stump sprout. We also looked at is there any difference in this preference between birch and stump sprout at different PCT strategy. To conduct this study, we used a pre-commercial thinning experiment located 3 sites in southern Sweden. Here you can see the spruce symbol as a location of this experiment. And in the right-hand side, you can see the zoom in of the location with the ungulates density. So they have quite similar ungulate density in the experimental side. So moving on to the experimental design. So this is kind of the demo for experimental design for each site, and it's the same for all the sites. So we have 3 pre-commercial thinning strategies and 1 control. So the control means no pre-commercial thinning was done, and PCT total mean all the broadleafs and everything was removed. Only 2,000 spruce per hectare was remained in this treatment. And then we have PCT dense, where we removed everything. I mean, all broadleafs, but we kept 2,000 birch per hectare, along with 2,000 spruce per hectare. And then finally, we have PCT spot, where what we did within the radius of 0.7 meter radius of each spruce, we removed everything, all broadleafs, but the remaining area was untouched. So for each treatment, you can see that we have total 16 plots with 4 clusters. So in each cluster, we have 4 treatments. And if I just zoom in, we have 2 different plot size from the center of the plot. The small one with 1.7 meter that we used to measure all the forage or fodder. Yeah, we call it forage for ungulates. And within this large sample plot, 3 meter radius, we measured all the main stem for timber production. And the experiment was established in 2013 and 14 when the spruce height was 1 to 2 meter and birch height was 2 to 3 meter. And we measured every year until 3rd year. So today I will present the result from the last year measurement, I mean after 3 growing season. So moving to the answer for the question. So I'm gonna show the result for first question, that can PCT strategies trade-off between forage and timber. So here's the mixture, that's PCT dense. If you remember that we kept 2,000 birches along with 2,000 spruce. And then we have spruce monoculture with only 2,000 spruce. And we found that the volume production was, there is no significant difference in volume production between these 2 stands. And we also get from this mixture a high number of or amount of forage for ungulates. So if I say forage for ungulates, that's mean branches and leaves. And after 3 growing season, we found 4 megaton biomass for ungulates in per hectare area. So moving to the next question, is browsing has any effect, or pre-commercial thinning has any effect on browsing or not. So we have a no PCT stand, we have PCT stand, and we found that ungulates prefer to browse on PCT stand. And that could be because of the accessibility in the PCT stand, and also maybe new quality food in this PCT stand. And moving to the final question, is there any difference in seed birch and the stump sprout? So we have seed birch and we have the stump sprout, and we found the ungulates prefer seed birch. And that could be because of the morphological difference and also food quality. So here is the quick look how much they differ in browsing proportion. So seed birch and stump sprout both present only in spot and dance treatment. So you can see that they're kind of double browsing in seed birch over stump sprout. Okay, so what we can take masses at home from this presentation. So first, precedence could be a potential strategy to trade off forage and timber production. And ungulates prefer to browse on pre-commercial thinning stand, then no pre-commercial thinning stand. And they also prefer to browse on seed birch over stump sprout. So just a little bit of practical implementation. So implementation of this strategy could minimize the overall browsing pressure in the landscape, forest landscape, because from the earlier study, we know that there is a relation between forage availability and browsing. And it's also potentially could minimize the conflict of interest between forest owners and hunters in the Nordic countries. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for being here and paying attention. So you can ask questions if time allows, otherwise you can write in the chat. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. We do have time for a question if anybody has a. Yeah, Nelson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. This was a very interesting presentation. I was wondering, in some ecosystems in Northeastern America, large ungulates can be seen in some cases as a silviculture tool to perform pre-commercial thinning, because they would feed on some species that would create the same effects of a PCT treatment. Is it the kind of thing that is also observed in Nordic countries?
Sorry, can you just repeat your one more time? I think I'm misheard.
Yeah, I was wondering if in some cases are large ungulates that do browse on some species can be seen as a surrogate or as a treatment, a PCT treatment by itself. This is something we observe in some ecosystems in Eastern North America. So I'm just wondering if it's the case in Nordic countries.
To my knowledge, at least in Sweden, I don't know about such studies. I don't know that it's happening there to use ungulates as a PCT tool.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our next presenter now. So we've finished our first grouping of oral presentations, and now we're going to move on to the more rapid fire poster presentations. So our first one is from Paul Zeltens. So the poster presentation, remember, we have 4 minutes for your poster here.
Okay.
Excellent.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear and see me, my presentation.
Yeah, that's great.
I would like to present some results which are a part of my PhD project about comparative growth modeling of genetically improved, not only Norway spruce, but also Scots pine and silver birch, which are considered to be important tree species for production forestry here in the Baltic Sea region. And in this poster, I present a case study of a 50-year-old Norway spruce plantation, which has been established with vegetatively propagated clones, 19 together. And for boreal tree species, there is quite limited availability of long-term data of genetically improved trees. And usually we have data from younger progeny or clonal trails available. So this plantation, which has already reached the dimensions of final felling, it gives a good chance to study this long-term clonal effect of tree growth. And this is important for adequate accounting of genetic gains and these altered dynamics due to the clonal effect in growth models, which are further used in practical forestry. In this study, we collected increment cores from trees and reconstructed diameter growth of trees. And then I found that Chapman-Richards base function, it fitted the best for the data. So we used that one. And then the aim was to disentangle this genetic effect, this clonal effect on these growth curves of these trees. So for this purpose, I applied a mixed modeling approach, which means that a clone was set as a random factor in this model. And this gave a chance to estimate genetic variance of model parameters, all parameters. And this is important from tree breeding point of view, because, well, that's this genetic variation is the thing we work with when estimating genetic parameters and so on. And the result shows that actually all three model parameters were significantly affected by this clone. It means that with tree breeding, we can control actually not only the asymptote, but also the growth rate and growth shape of the trees. And also in the poster, I present additionally the dynamics of long-term dynamics of genetic parameters like heritability and coefficient of genetic variation, which might be quite interesting because there are limited information about long-term dynamics of these parameters. That quite shortly is all I would like to comment about the poster. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We do have time for one question if anybody has a question for Pauls.
Okay, maybe I see that there are no questions. I can just comment that the work is ongoing. Still, we are now reconstructing the height growth of these clones of 35 trees, which is quite hard work. And hopefully we will get some interesting results about climate sensitivity and how it differs between these best growing clones and the worst growing ones, which might be interesting results for future also.
Yes, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Pauls. Okay, we will move on to our next poster here. Okay, so our next poster is IBFRA2021.
Can you share your screen, Greg?
I'm going to sure try. Okay, that should be it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amira, and I'm here to talk about my master project, planting density of black spruce in boreal forest. We all know planting density is an important factor affecting reforestation success, and mechanical site preparation is used before planting to improve soil conditions and create favorable microsites. That's why our objective was to understand the interacting effect of mechanical site preparation, understory composition, and planting density on the growth of planted black spruce and managing forest site subject to paludification. For this objective, we selected in variant sites 54 plots. Each plot has 4 quadra. In this site, we have 2 kinds of planting density, 1,100 plants per hectare and 2,500 plants per hectare, and 3 types of mechanical sites preparation: forest harrowing, disc trenching, or left as untreated controls. And the methodology to evaluate the effect of planting density and mechanical sites preparation, we measured the growth of plants in black spruce and their density, also canopy cover, and we measured the carbon and nitrogen ration of soil. Now, I'm going to speak about my main result to you. Firstly, we checked the environmental variables for each type of mechanical site preparation and planting density. We found the interaction between them was significant for the density of all trees, but not significant for canopy cover and carbon and nitrogen ration for soil. Secondly, we checked the effect of tree density and the vascular community composition on the height growth and DPH of planting tree, and we found 3 points. Number 1, conifer density negatively affect on height growth of planting black spruce. And the second one, alder and salix density negatively affect on DPH of planting black spruce. And finally, understory vascular community dissimilarity had a significant negatively effect on height growth, but positive effect on DPH. In conclusion, my project is documenting the effect of planting density and mechanical site preparation on understory, soil, and planting spruce height in boreal forest, Quebec, Canada. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We do have time for one question if we have any. You can put them in the chat or time to ask one. Okay, thank you. I think we'll have to move on to the next presentation. These posters go quickly. So if you do have any questions for Amir, I'll just ask that you follow up with her directly afterwards, okay? So thank you very much for your presentation here. Okay, and I will, okay. Now I'll move on to our next poster presentation, which is Georgy Alexandrov.
Yeah, okay, I'm sharing the screen, yes?
Yes, please.
Yeah, this one. So, and it's, but before I will show you the results of the model simulations of the climate change, I will first to show I will show you first the current situation, not current, but that average, or that this is the average for the 1981-2010, the area of the boreal and subpolar climate zones. And this is the area of cool temperate climate zones. The zones are calculated using the definition based on biotemperature. Its biotemperature is part of the Holdridge life zone classification, which is used maybe already 60 or 70 years. This is for Europe, and this is data set which is of reanalysis, which is available freely for monthly air temperature. And this is the same boreal and subboreal climate zones in North America, and this is a cool temperate zone. And the model simulations for for the worst case scenario. This is so-called SSP 8.5 scenario. They show that boreal climate zone will dramatically retreat to the north, and most of places which are now in the boreal climate zone will be in the cool temperate climate zone. This ENM CM5 model is, this is, yes, the period is the end of the century, average for 30 years. It's a Russian model, and this is quite optimistic about these changes. Other models are not so optimistic, and this is MRI, Meteorological Research Institute in Japan, and this is Max Planck Institute for Meteorology in Germany, in Hamburg, and this is again a Japanese model. It's Japan Meteorological Climatological Community model, like a community model, and this is a model from France, and this is a Canadian Earth system model, which is the most pessimistic, and it shows that what was the places that was in the boreal climate zone, they will be by the end of the century in the cool temperate zone, and the places that were in warm temperate zone will be in cool temperate zone, will be in warm temperate zone. This model calculations pose serious questions for management of spruce forest, because spruce is a typical spruce forest is a typical ecosystems for boreal climate zone, and the question whether they will remain in the boreal regions when there will be no boreal climate there. So this is quite difficult question, and in fact there is no how to say clear answer, because even now the spruce forests are growing in cool temperate climate zone, and probably they can survive, but there are also some signs that probably they cannot sustain long such retreat of the boreal climate zone. In some part of Eastern Europe, they spruce forests become disappearing, and so that it's a signal, in fact, that we should do about how to manage spruce forest, because all the solutions are taken now, but the consequences we will see within 70 years ago. They will grow in a different climate than now. So that's the question we should somehow to discuss and consider in our within International Boreal Forest Association. So thank you. That's pose the question something like this. And also we have yesterday some discussion, and those who are interested in some summary of this discussion or keep this discussion going, please contact me using my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you. We'll have to move on to the next presentation now. So if you have any comments for Georgie, you'll have to contact him directly, okay? So thank you. We'll ask you to stop sharing your screen, and we'll move on to the next presentation from Marcella Windmuller.
Hi, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on time zone. Does that look okay, Brad? Great. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to give a really big overview of a project that I'm working on with multiple collaborators in Minnesota, looking at eastern spruce dwarf mistletoe on both sand dynamics and forest management practices in Minnesota. So the big takeaways, so black spruce is a dominant species in Minnesota, and it sits at the southern edge of the boreal forest. And so it might be expected that at the southern edge, the species dynamics may look a little different than in other places where black spruce is a dominant species. Eastern spruce dwarf mistletoe is one of the main disturbance agents, and we have a lot of information on the pathology. and it kills its host, which is different than many other mistletoe species, but very little research on how it actually influences stand dynamics, and then how that links to how we manage these forests, both in terms of the forest and silviculture and the actual logging practices. So we're seeing a shift in stand structure and composition. So we're seeing a shift in species regeneration within those mistletoe pockets. We're getting greater species diversity and a shift in which species are coming in. And we're also seeing a shift in stand density. However, with the management, there's a lot of unknowns, especially from both the forestry and logging communities, related to both the short and longer term impacts of management decisions and how we're managing this disease, which is a landscape level disease, but we're managing at the stand scale. So like I said, Minnesota sits at the southern edge of the boreal, southern and western edge of black spruce's range across the boreal forest. And within Minnesota, black spruce is a really extensive area. So one of the main management organizations within the state is the Department of Natural Resources, or the DNR. And across the northern part of Minnesota, the DNR manages millions of acres of black spruce forest, or thousands of acres of black spruce forest. It is the second most harvested pulpwood species in Minnesota. And it's often managed using a clear-cut silvicultural system with aerial seeding on rotations of 60 to 120 years, depending on the site quality and site index. These are even age systems. Dwarf mistletoe, eastern spruce dwarf mistletoe, is the main disturbance agent in black spruce systems and generally kills trees within 17 years, which is relatively quick given the overall slow growing nature of these forest systems. At very, very high levels, we've also noticed that it's able to infect eastern larch, another native species in Minnesota, Larix laricina. So there's still many, many unknowns. And one of them relates to how does eastern spruce dwarf mistletoe influence stand composition and structure? And as we consider management, what does this look like from different perspectives? So when we're thinking about stand structure and composition, we're looking at multiple scales, both the stand and landscape level. And to do this, we utilized a tiered approach in sampling, utilizing both plots on the ground, so utilizing a series of plots that cover extensive areas of the stand, and within each plot collecting metrics, standard forest inventory metrics on species, diameter, height, and mistletoe rating on both the overstory, sapling, and seedling layer to really collect what is going on in terms of the stand structure. From that, we can start looking at how diameter distributions and how species composition is changing. So these forests are really heavily dominated by just a few species, including black spruce, Picea mariana, which includes Picea mariana with mistletoe, the M, the dead, and then the live in the white, as well as Larix laricina, eastern larch, which is Lala, either live, and then a host of other species. And we found a huge amount of diversity in those species, especially when we started looking at the higher levels of eastern spruce dwarf mistletoe. So looking at this diameter distribution, in stands that do not have infections, we see a very unimodal distribution dominated by live black spruce tree species. That shifts greatly as we look at how mistletoe impacts it, going from mostly live trees, so live black spruce, and then live black spruce impacted with mistletoe, to a big shift including live black spruce, but a lot of dead black spruce, and then a huge increase in eastern larch. Using this data and using those ground truth points, we also started looking at what does this look like when we're thinking about landscape modeling. So there currently is a model that was developed to predict mistletoe. We utilize this information to then develop and see how well is it doing. So this model has never been benchmarked. And we found that model was predicting presence of mistletoe at about 50% accuracy. So about 50% of the time it was getting mistletoe right. So about a coin toss. And what we're seeing as we're investigating more about mistletoe in terms of stand structure is that mistletoe isn't just a yes, no. Mistletoe influences how that looks. And depending on if mistletoe is relating or has killed the tree or not killed the tree, really influences the stand structure. And using some of this new knowledge that we're gaining, we're also developing our own models at this landscape level to begin to explore what are some of those variables related to the presence of mistletoe, and can we start to see that, or do we need different information as we think about modeling mistletoe? So as we're looking at stand structure at the stand and the landscape scale, we're also utilizing different methods, including surveys and focus groups, to talk to foresters and loggers about how they're managing forest and what they're thinking about as they think about these forests. So these have multiple research questions, and they kind of break into two different themes, kind of the knowledge about Eastern Spruce dwarf mistletoe, so ESDM, and as well as the treatments. So 1 and 2 kind of really focus on can foresters, what foresters and loggers know about Eastern Spruce dwarf mistletoe, and then how are they treating it and how confident are they in that? And so the confidence in the treatment varies widely in terms of what they're doing. The blue is confidence in the ability to correctly identify dwarf mistletoe in the field. The orange is confidence in timber sale appraisal methods to detect mistletoe in the stand, and the gray is confidence in stand assessment methods to detect dwarf mistletoe in the stand. And you can kind of see it goes down and it varies to some organizations and some respondents having very little confidence in their ability to detect dwarf mistletoe through stand assessments. And then we also saw very widely varying answers related to the thoughts on the effectiveness of treatments. And I think one of the most interesting pieces is almost a quarter of respondents were unsure of if the treatments were actually successful in treating dwarf mistletoe. And so as we did focus groups, there's a lot of thoughts related to this is a native pest. I'm not worried about this. This is really difficult to manage and we don't know about it. And it's important to identify it during the growing season, which is often not the time when these stands are sampled because of them being in bogs and the difficulty in access. They're often sampled in the winter. And other research that we're doing is looking at the difficulty when we do have snow on these trees in detecting differences of, is that a branch or is that mistletoe? And so wrapping this up, so Eastern dwarf mistletoe influences stand structure and composition. We're seeing a shift in species diversity, which can provide some really great values when we think about climate adaptation and also resilience. However, we also need to think about severity. So it creates a range of conditions based on the severity of infection. And it's also likely based on site quality and previous stand conditions. These are all things we're starting to dig into. There's a range of management options. However, managers and loggers are potentially unsure or are not confident in if those treatments are effectively managing dwarf mistletoe. And so there's still much more to consider linking stand dynamics and forest management practices as we think about this disease agent and the forest dynamics of these systems. I want to acknowledge funding, as well as we have 3 recent papers out on this work. And if there's time for questions, I can I can welcome questions.
Yeah, thank you. We do have time for a question if there. Okay, one question I have is, what is the common management for controlling mistletoe? In my part of the world, in mistletoe and pine, is just basically cut all the pine trees down. Is what's being done for mistletoe in black spruce?
Yeah, so it's using a clear cut system, and they also have what's called a 5-foot cutting rule, which I know since we're in North America or in the United States, that metric versus English units. But so there's a 5-foot cutting rule where all trees greater than 5 feet are supposed to be removed. And so we're starting to, that's what some of the research we're doing this summer is we've had stands prior to treatment and now going back out after treatment to see did they actually follow the treatment that was prescribed, and if this is a state rule, what does that mean? And so some of the preliminary pictures and some of the preliminary data that we're seeing is that we're seeing a lot of residuals left in the stand, including residuals of black spruce that have mistletoe, as well as also doing the stand boundaries and seeing mistletoe in the adjacent stand. So even if the treatment was implemented effectively, we're seeing mistletoe all around. So trying to capture that to begin to answer those questions that loggers and foresters mentioned of, well, maybe we're treating the stand correctly, but if we have an adjacent stand that has it, is it actually effective and does it make sense? Especially when we think about the time and cost it takes to remove those really small diameter trees that are not merchantable.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time here, so we'll move on to our next presentation. But thank you for that talk on black spruce. So our next speaker is David Montway.
Hello, nice to see you all. I will just share my screen.
Well, you might have to stop sharing yours there first, Marcella, and then David can share his. There we go.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you very much for the introduction. Once again, my name is David Montway, and today I'm going to talk about an experiment testing if exposure to an artificial drought treatment can improve resilience to a subsequent natural drought event in Norway spruce. And this all relates to how the different legacies of drought play out for the tree. On the one side, drought may damage a tree, causing long-lasting negative effects. And this could be, for example, among other effects, loss of conductivity, depletion of non-structural carbohydrates, and other effects. And this can predispose a tree and reduce resilience to future droughts. And on the other hand, drought may also induce adjustments, for example, towards a safer hydraulic system, reduced leaf area, more and deeper roots. And that could interpret this as priming, and this could lead to increased resilience to future droughts. And this leads to the following research questions. So first, can prime trees cope better with subsequent drought? And second, can we see a priming effect in the xylem through a safer water conducting system? And these questions were tested based on samples from a through-fall interception experiment in Sweden, established at a stand age of 28 years in a Norway spruce forest. The experiment is a complete randomized block design with 4 blocks. And for these questions, 3 treatments were considered. First, at the top in yellow, this is interception for 2 growing seasons. And then below in blue, we have a no treatment control. And finally in red, a prolonged drought treatment, 6 seasons of through-fall interception from 1990 to 1996. This experiment was affected by a severe natural drought event in 1992. And in these figures of the year 1992 is indicated in brown, while the other years from 1961 to 2018 are indicated in gray. On the x-axis, we have the month. And as you can see, 1992 was characterized by record low precipitation in May and June, in combination with high temperatures in these months, and therefore creating severe drought conditions, as shown on the very right, in the very right panel, with the standardized precipitation evaporation index that goes into negative in June and lagging into July. As you can see, this drought event happened 2 years after the short drought treatment ended and exaggerated drought conditions for the prolonged drought treatment. With this combination of experimental and natural drought, it is possible to test whether previous exposure to drought can increase resilience to a natural drought 2 years later. It is also possible to see how the treatment under active drought performed to the added burden of the natural drought. So with this in mind, I took the liberty of renaming the treatments. Short-term drought is now primed. Control remains the same, and prolonged is active because the treatment was active in the year of the natural drought. So how does basal area increment responses to drought look like? This is indicated here. We can first see that the artificial drought treatments worked. It's generally a reduction in basal area growth. And in the drought year of 1992, a rank change in basal area increments is visible, with the prime trees in yellow overtaking the control in blue. And the active drought treatment seems most strongly affected by this natural drought. And to look at that a bit more in detail, based on basal area increments, several indices of resilience to drought were calculated, and all of them are based on relative changes in basal area increments based on pre- and post-drought reference periods. The first one at the top is resistance, and it indicates that the prime treatment did not drop as deep as the other treatments in the drought year. For the next one, recovery, we can say that the prime treatment increased their basal area increments more than other groups after the drought, but this is not significant. And for resilience, which is the ratio between pre-drought and post-drought basal area increments, we see that the primed group is ahead and the active group does worse. The same pattern can be seen for relative resilience, which is an additional measure weighing resilience by resistance. In summary, an advantage of priming is significant for resistance and resilience, and the active drought treatment does worse across the board. Next, we look at the wood anatomy to answer the question if priming induced the production of xylem with hydraulic properties geared more towards hydraulic safety. And to characterize this, we look at the hydraulic cell lumen diameter and cell wall thickness of the tracheates. Smaller lumen diameters and thicker walls can indicate reduced risk of hydraulic failure under drought. And in the years preceding the natural drought, the prime trees had smaller lumen diameters and thicker cell walls. But variability is high here. So in conclusion, This study indicates that priming can improve resistance and resilience to a natural drought in Norway spruce under the conditions represented by the site and the climate. It is possible to link this effect with a trend towards a safer water conducting xylem structure. But it is important to note that this positive effect of priming may quickly be exceeded under more frequent drought events with climate change. And the response of the active drought treatment hints a little bit at that. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks, David. There's a question in the chat box. So I'll just read it out here for everybody. But do you see potential for such an approach in the production phase of seedlings to be outplanted?
Yeah, potentially there is a lot of research about that in agricultural crops. And I've seen a paper testing that for oak seedlings, where they exposed oak seedlings in, I think that was in the Mediterranean, to drought in the nursery, and then tested whether this actually improved drought tolerance when outplanted. And they did not find an effect. So it could work, but I think it's, yeah, there isn't much evidence for it in trees at this point.
All right, thank you very much, David. So with that, we will move on to our next presentation. So next we have Nelson Tifo. So again, we're switching back to the poster presentations now. So these are kind of the rapid fire 4-minute posters. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nelson.
Sorry, I'm just, okay, I'll start again. Share screen, there you go, share. Can you see that?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks again, Brad, and thank you everyone for having joined this this session. So my name is Nelson. I work with Natural Resources Canada, and I'll take the next few minutes just to give you an overview of a study we are working on right now, and this study is set in the context of boreal mixed wood stands, which typically regenerate naturally with a very high abundance of fast-growing, light-demanding species such as trembling aspen, while management objectives are generally centered on the production of conifers such as white spruce seedling. And we had a very interesting presentation just a bit earlier. We looked at similar questions. So this experiment was established in this context in Northern Ontario almost 20 years ago now, and it comprises a long list of treatments, but here I'm just focusing on 4 of them that you can see here at the center of the poster. There's an untreated control in which planted white spruce seedlings were left to grow with all the competing vegetation naturally occurring on the site, and then 2 treatments in which there was a selective control of either all the woody vegetation, thus leaving only the herbaceous and shrubby vegetation on site, or the control of the herbaceous layer, thus leaving only the woody vegetation growing with the trees in these plots. And there was also a set of treatments with complete vegetation control, in which the seedlings were left to grow without any interspecific competition at all. So as you can imagine, this kind of design allows to disentangle the specific effect of different competing vegetation groups undergrowth of the planted seedlings. So here what I'm showing are preliminary results after 15 years of growth. And these results will need to be refined following other analysis. But for now, what we see is a general trend towards the towards a positive effect of any type of vegetation management treatment on seedling growth, with one exception though. For example, if you look at height in 2018, we see that there was no significant difference after 15 years between the control plots and the plots in which there was a complete vegetation control over the years. This might be due for some kind of positive impact that vegetation has on the microenvironment of the planted seedlings. So anyway, now we are in the process of getting together a full database that will include other variables that we've measured on this site, including foliar nutrition, soil nutrients, as well as soil microbiome data. We've also conducted understory vegetation surveys, light measurement, and we've also measured the size and distribution of the competing trembling aspen individuals. So our hope is that by bringing this whole data set together, we'll be able to better understand how the different treatments impact tree growth, and thus support the development of management approach that can recreate those mixed wood stands without creating planted white spruce monoculture. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nelson. Looks like we are, our time is up for this. So if you have any questions for Nelson, please follow up with him, and we'll move on to our next poster presentation, okay? So our next poster is from Nadezhda Janikova.
Okay. Sorry. Is it okay? Can you see it?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. My name is Nadia Genikova. I work in the Forest Research Institute in Petrozavodsk, Russia. Our research was carried out in the southern boreal zone in the northwest of Russia. The object of the study were old-aged bilberry spruce forests and adjacent cutover areas up to 10 years after felling. We assessed the amount of tree undergrowth along the transects laid from the forest to the cutover. We divided each transect into 4 sections: forest edge, it is 8 meters from the edge into the forest, cutover edge, and cutover. The total amount of spruce undergrowth in the forest averaged 4,000 exemplars per hectare for all the sample plots. 2 years after logging, the amount of spruce undergrowth in the forest zone did not differ from the other zones. In the 3rd year after logging, both in the cutover edge zone and in the open cutting, the number of spruce seedlings increased several times. In 5 and 10 years after logging, favorable conditions for the appearance and preservation of spruce undergrowth are observed only in the forest edge and cutover edge zones. On 10-year-old cuttings dominated by birch, the total amount of spruce undergrowth is less than in the adjacent bilberry spruce forest. So the transitional zones between the spruce forest and the cutover area are the most favorable for the natural regeneration of spruce. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nadia. Are there any questions? We have time for a question or two here. So one question I have for you is you're showing an increase in the edge zone for spruce regeneration. So were you looking at any of the factors that might be controlling that, or what's the reason for that?
we think that the main reason is the less competition with birch and with grass vegetation that increased in the open area after cutting. We think that's the main reason for this.
So there's more competition out in the center of the clear cut than along the edge.
Yes, in the center of cutting, there are more birch planting, more graminoids plants, and near the edge, near the forest, this 8 meters line, more clear without birch and without graminoids. So the spruce seedlings can be can grow, and it is more favorable for spruce seedlings to grow. This line, these transitional zones between forest and clear cutting.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so we will move on to our next presentation. So Natalia Korliova.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? And can you see my screen?
Looks good.
Hello, my name is Natalia. I'm from Czech University of Life Sciences, and I would like to present to you the results of the study of Norway spruce survival during severe Ipsipographus outbreak that destroy coniferous forests in warming climates. Here you can see the pictures of our study area in Šumava National Park. And a very small proportion of trees tends to escape and survive, despite a vast majority of literature that investigate bark beetle caused tree mortality factors. Studies of tree survival are quite rare. That's why we were interested in this phenomenon, and we asked why those trees survive. As a starting point, we investigated environmental and biotic factors related to tree resistance to bark beetle mass attacks. We compiled a data set of almost 600 trees in total, originating from a natural old-growth spruce monodominated forest that belongs to the Bohemian forest and is located at the border of Germany, Czechia, and Austria. We used field and remotely sensed data, namely Landsat 5 images, and high-resolution Google Earth time series imagery. Surviving trees were identified using visual inspection and high-resolution Google Earth time series imagery spanning a period from 2000 to 2019. Results of clustering analysis showed a non-random spatial pattern of LTS distribution within study area. Nonlinear logistic regression fit in likelihood framework showed that tree survival probability decreases with increasing stem density and stem diameter, while trees with longer crowns growing in more mesic environments have a higher chance to survive. Interactions between biotic covariates and aridity levels revealed that higher self-shading ratios may mitigate negative effects of soil moisture deficit on tree survival. Additionally, aridity compounded the negative effects of resource competition in denser stands and increased susceptibility of larger trees to bark beetles. We argue that surviving trees should be retained in the forest because they may contribute to building more resistant forests in future. This is all from me, and I would like to say thank you to many people who contributed a lot to this research by providing their data, field support, and financial and administrative support. Thank you so much, and if you have any questions, you're welcome.
Hey, Brad,
thank you very much. Yeah, we do have time for a question.
Yeah, okay. I would have a question for you. Thank you so much. If you could just go back a slide, and I would just like to hear you about. Okay, so there's maybe the next one. So if I understand you right, as stem density increase, survival probability decrease, but it's the same for stem diameter. So I would have expect the opposite, given that if we increase density, usually diameter increase. So how do you interpret this effect of stem diameter on survival probability?
Well, the results that we got show that stem density, yes, with increasing stem diameter, the survival probability decreases because bark beetles, if the stage of an outbreak is such that bark beetles multiply, their population increases, and they devour totally, they need more feeding substrate to feed the growing population. So the higher stem density means that the trees, larger trees, have lower chance to survive because they are selected for by increasing bark beetle population.
Okay, that makes sense.
More food. They need more food.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I think we'll have to move on to our next presentation here, but thank you very much, Natalie. So our next presentation is from Sonali Renada.
Can you hear me? And I will try to share my screen.
Yeah, we can hear you good.
Okay, great.
And there's your presentation. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So hello, everybody. My name is Sonali Ranade, and I'm working as a postdoc in Rosario's group at the Umeå Plant Science Center in Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, located at Umeå in the northern part of Sweden. Today, I'm going to talk about single nucleotide polymorphisms, or the SNPs, that are associated with the local adaptation to light in Norway spruce, and then their potential role of lignin-mediated immunity. So first of all, I will just introduce you what exactly is a cline. So cline is a measurable gradient of a single trait or a character in a particular species across its geographical range. I worked mainly with the red and the far red spectrum of the light, and phytochromes are the photoreceptors that perceive these light wavelengths. Phytochromes, they exist in two interconvertible forms. PR is the inactive form, which is abundant in the dark, and PR on the absorption of the red light gets converted to PFR, which is actually the active form. PFR again gets converted back to PR on absorption of the far red light. In northern part of Sweden, the populations of the trees, they receive more amount of far red light than as compared to the southern part of the Sweden in the growing seasons. And that's why there is also a local adaptation to far red light in Norway spruce and in Scots pine, which are the dominated tree species in the forest of Sweden. Now, this was known for a long time, and the classical studies from Clapham, here I quote two examples which prove this fact, that the Norway spruce requires far red light to maintain growth, and this increases clinally northwards. Also, Scots pine, in Scots pine it was observed that the far red light is necessary for the secondary needle extension in the northern, but not in the southern part of Sweden. So we studied the ecotypic variation to different light wavelengths in Scots pine. Seeds were collected from these three latitudes across Sweden, and seedlings were grown under continuous red, far red, and blue light. Dark was used as a control. Since the synchronization in germination cannot be achieved in conifers by application of red light, which is usually done in species like model species like Arabidopsis, so we collected the seedlings in the same developmental stage, that is after opening of the cotyledons, for all our experiments. The length of the hypocotyls were measured, and then we saw that there was a northward decrease. Sorry for this, yeah. There was a northward decrease in the inhibitory effect of far red light with respect to the dark. Next, we moved on to study the responses under shade in conifers. So under vegetative shade, there is a decrease in the red to the far red ratio as the red light is absorbed by the pigments and far red light is reflected. Now, SAS, or the shade avoidance syndrome, is characterized by elongated stem and internodes, decrease in the root elongation, reduced vegetative branching, acceleration of flowering, and reduction in the chlorophyll synthesis. So Scots pine is mainly the shade intolerant species, and Norway spruce is the shade tolerant species. So what is the relation between lignin and the light? So lignin, as we all know, that it is the second most abundant polymer next to cellulose. It provides structural support and plays an important role in plant defense by forming the barrier to the pathogens. Light regulates the synthesis of lignin, and low red to far red ratio or shade decreases the lignin production in most plant species. So what happens is, in response to shade, is the stem becomes weaker and the plant becomes vulnerable to pathogens. So next we went on to perform the transcriptomics under shade in Norway spruce and Scots pine. So we use these two light conditions as shade light conditions and sunlight condition. Under shade, the ratio for red to far red light was 0.2, and under sun it was equal to 1. So we used the same growth cabinets as before, and then we went on to the RNA sequencing. Well, this study concluded that some aspects of the shade responses are conserved in conifers, but yet the underlying mechanisms may be different in conifers as compared to the gymnosperms. For example, the defense-related genes in pine and spruce, which have the contrasting responses to shade. In pine, for example, there was higher number of defense-related genes being downregulated by shade as compared to the genes upregulated by shade. But in Norway spruce, a similar number of defense-related genes were downregulated and upregulated. There was a shade avoidance response in pine, which was similar to Arabidopsis. Next, we went on to study the decline in response to shade in Norway spruce. There was a significant, with this bar chart, you can see here that there was a significant increase in the length of the hypocotyls grown under shade towards the northern latitudes. We found a set of candidate genes which, when compared to the gene expression in response to shade in the two populations of Norway spruce across Sweden. So we took two extreme latitudes, latitude 56 in the south of Sweden and latitude 67 in the north of Sweden. So analysis of the exome sequencing data from samples across Sweden shows that there is a climb from south to north in the nucleotide diversity. So for this experiment, we took this is the details of the number of trees we used from each latitude across Sweden, and then we saw that differentially regulated genes in response to shade, they showed the latitudinal climb in missense nucleotide variations. So here I give an example of a gene which is called as MIP3. It is a transcription factor that represses the lignin pathway. So this was upregulated in the southern populations of Norway spruce as compared to the as compared to the northern populations. Here you can see that the allele frequency across the 6 populations that we used for the study, the allele frequency increases as we go from the south to the north with one allele, and the other allele frequency decreases. Similarly, you can also see there is a climb which is there in the genotype frequency across the 6 populations as well. So when we align the MIB3 protein from Norway spruce and Arabidopsis, you can see that this was the particular amino acid change here, the SNP, which was responsible for this climb. And as you can see that it lies just next to the DNA binding domain, and this can affect the mode of action of this transcription factor, maybe like binding or such. Some other genes that also showed decline in the nucleotide diversity are related to the immunity and also the lignin and cell wall related genes. Also, there was one gene which was light regulated, and yet another transcription factor which is responsible for the cold acclimatization. So the conclusions from this study that we draw was like the transcriptomic and the exome capture analysis reveal an adaptive decline for the shade tolerance in Norway spruce population in Sweden. The genes involved in the lignin pathway and immunity seem to play an important role in contributing towards the local adaptation of light. Norway spruce populations from the north, they respond to low red to far red light, but they might be also adapted towards the disease resistance by upregulation of the lignin pathway that is linked to the immunity. And this results could contribute to the designing of disease resilient trees, which are adapted to the local light conditions from the context of the climate change. With that, I thank Rosario, my supervisor, and my former lab members and colleagues, and also the funding agencies. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions. Hello.
All right, thank you, Sonali. We do have time for one quick question if anybody, if there are any questions here. Okay, if not, we'll move on. But thank you very much for your presentation, Sonali. We'll now move on to our final presentation of the session here. So Tatiana Chernikova.
I think you're muted.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Good day. Glad to see everybody. My name is Tatiana Chernikova. I'm a geobotanist and I work at the Institute of Geography of the Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. Here you can see the title of our presentation, and at the beginning I would like to say that the current composition of temperate forest in Europe is related mainly to silviculture rather than to natural factors, and European coniferous forests today, as many scientists believe, are the result of centuries human activities. As you can see, the Moscow region under consideration is located on the southern boundary of the spruce forest area. This slide also shows the distribution on spruce and emerald forest according to a well-famous vegetation map of Europe and the study region location. This territory is large enough and varied in landscape and botanical geographic conditions. Features of the region are, firstly, there is the southern part of spruce forest distribution and boreal zone. Most of the spruce communities are plantations. The territory is local within the boundaries of the large metropolis. As a result, all forests have protected status, which makes it possible to observe natural succession. And finally, insufficient forest management of plantation in the last 20 years, which is unfortunately typical for forestry in general in the country. So the question is, what are the prospects of the spruce forest development along the southern edge of the range in the central Russian plate? I would note this refers to not active cutting operation forests. To answer this question, we applied the following methodology. Ecotop analysis through the assessment of the plant community's composition, especially the understory race, whose vegetation includes the state of the environmental beta. Next, analysis of the forest community succession and development of an expert dynamic model for 40 years period. Using the Maxent model of the cutting and two multi-temporal retrospective scenarios of spruce forest distribution based on field and remote sensing data. Next, retrospective model of the special temporal organization of spruce forests for a 30-year period. And finally, comparison of two different period models of successional dynamics. As I have said above, the study was based on field data. There is a result of the classification of the communities, including the spruce trees in main canopy place. I should note that the degree of ecosystem normalization increase in a southward direction from northwest to southeast of the territory. And in the table, we can see four associations group for both spruce and a mixed forest formation. Here we present indicator species for better understanding of community groups composition. The species list was calculated according to the abundance and frequency on the sample plot within the understory layers. In the first group, for example, you can see mainly boreal composition of herbs, shrubs, and moss species. In the fourth, species of nemoral composition, such as Galeobodon luteum, Agapodium podagraria, Carex pilosa, and so on. The direction of successional dynamic in spruce forests were analyzed based on the current composition of the main forest forming tree species in metapopulation of Picea ades, Pinus sylvestris, small leaf species such include Betula pendula, Betula pubescens, and Popola tremula, and broadleaf also species such as Quercus rubor, Tilia cordata, and so on. This makes it possible to assess the prospects of the renewal of spruce communities based on the ratio of these species at different layers, canopy layers, subcanopy, shrub layers, ground layers. As a result of this analysis, the dynamic of the coniferous formation was developing for several decades for future, 2 and 4 decades. I would like to note that the transition of this category of spruce forest to spruce small-leaved forest is rather typical for spruce plantation with poor management in natural disturbance influence, such as windfall, insects, drought, and so on. We also developed the retrospective model of spruce forest dynamic by Maxet and method for the 30 years period using historical Landsat 5 mosaic. Field reliefs data last decades were used as a training sample. This part of the work was done by Ivan Kotlov, is an active participant of this study. Comparison of spatial structure of coniferous formation made possible to clearly see the change in forest cover. As an example, we can see a fragment of a map of forest diversity and different time interval. Detailed analysis of spruce forest structure demonstrates the main trends of successional dynamics, considering the community's origin and the ecological conditions of habitat. Here I would like to present a prediction of changes of spruce and spruce, aspen, birch forest in the existing mode of forest use in the region. The graph shows two scenarios of change in the area of spruce, aspen, birch forest, considering the urban planning situation and without it. Let me make a conclusion. Firstly, reduction of spruce forest in the main trend in transformation of coniferous forests, not only in the Moscow region, but on the territory of the European part of Russia. Spruce, aspen, birch forest shows a strictly opposite trend. During the study period, this proportion increased in 3 times, from 6 to 18%, which is explained by the lack of management for spruce plantations and recently their overgrowth, primarily with birch. In the coming decades, further increase of spruce, aspen, birch forests are expected to 32 or 22%, taking into account the urban development due to the reduction of the area of spruce as well as pine forests. Only a small part of numeral spruce, aspen, birch forest transformed into broad-leaved spruce forest. And this is also very possible given climate change. Thank you, that's all. Thank you for your attention.